All right, so this is the next video in my breakdown of stories, right? So circle theory is obsessed with stories and how we use narrative to transfer values and what that means for the development of society. Then stories matter. And so I've been interested in film recently. And most recently I watched The Stranger, Orson Welles, 1946. It's a noir film. And I think that there's some really interesting concepts that we can take from this story if we break it down. And so really it's an interesting perspective on the shadow, which is a Jungian concept about the darker side of humanity. And so in this work, it really is asking a really specific question, which is, if evil existed in your town, would you know? Our villain for the film, Franz Kindler, is the genocidal mind behind the Nazis, right? He's the one who comes up with the plan to commit mass genocide and develop all of that. And he successfully escapes punishment and finds refuge in Connecticut, where he is now marrying the daughter of a Supreme Court justice and awaiting his chance for war to come again. And this Nazi hunter's trying to find him and trying to smoke him out. But there's a lot of really interesting allegory in this, because the question, like I said, is, if evil was there, would you know? And so this is something I've been thinking a lot as I've been working on the book, because it's a really complicated thing. And I actually, to step way far back, what I was writing about today when I was working on it was the concept of Lucifer. And I find Lucifer very interesting in Christian mythos, because he's depicted in several different ways, right? You have this modern depiction, which really comes out of more the Middle Ages, right? This large-nosed, red-horned, prodding pitchfork character that, from what I can tell, is actually really just was created as a way to demonize Jewish people. But the original depiction of Lucifer is as the morning star. He's light, he is truth, he is all of these things that are beautiful. He is God's favored of the angels. He speaks with a silver tongue. And I find this depiction of him very interesting, because it's a version of Satan that shows the truth of what chaos is. And within this theory, we talk about the idea of order versus chaos. This is the central rule of our universe. And Lucifer is interesting in that depiction, because he now becomes the face of disorder. He becomes the face of chaos. But he never really has to lie. He just always has to make the truth work for him. And I think this is an interesting depiction of evil, and something that Wells does a really good job of exploring. The character Kindler throughout the entire film is so capable of spinning things to his advantage and to making truth work for him. And these ideas of being able to hide in plain sight. And so when we're talking about this Jungian idea of the shadow, what I think is interesting, we ask ourselves what a shadow is. And a shadow is only capable when there is light. It is incapable of existing in pure darkness. It is a reflection. It is the light connecting with physical being. And so it walks in the light. It exists there. That is the natural state for it. And it survives in that. And it perpetuates our anxieties, which is the most base motivator of humans. Right? This is a really common theme, right? From Camus to Kierkegaard to Heidegger, they all in the Western canon seem to have this idea that anxiety is the greatest motivator of human behavior. And when I say anxiety, I don't mean like a modern diagnosable concept of that, as much of the idea of this instinctual drive that originates in a sense of need. When we're hungry, we have anxiety. We have this need to fulfill. lack of shelter, water, etc. And this extends because humans are very abstract. Right? So humans tend to think beyond immediate necessities and have these abstract needs such as love and fulfillment that are characterized through these abstract and conceptual ideas. So yet again, we see this played with in film, and I know I tend to get off topic, but he's interested in this idea of Kindler. Yet again, is interested in justice. And this idea comes up throughout the film. And of course, we see all the classic motives, right? I mean, the white coat versus the black coat. I mean, all that classic Campbellian allegory. But justice is brought up a lot. This idea of bringing an individual to justice. And one thing I find interesting is at the end of it all, no matter how much denial the monster lives in, which is a theme, right? The shadow, the chaos, the evil incarnate is incapable of seeing themselves as anything but the victim. Always. And they're very good at explaining why they are. And when it comes time to face justice, they can't do it. They can't face those that have hurt because that would be a break in the psyche. To be able to separate from the understanding of the self as someone that has been victimized is a very complicated and difficult thing to do, especially for those that have created their identity around the idea that their actions are justified through their victimhood. And so we see this play out with the most monstrous and evil creatures. Lucifer, I return to it as a theme in my understanding of the idea of evil, sees himself as victimized by God. And we see this recur time and time and time again. And so, yet again, one of the ideas that Wells plays with to move past this idea that time is a constant force in the universe, which is something I haven't really considered. Time's really lucid and debated, really. I mean, does time exist, or is it purely a relative concept? Is something that is still to be figured out. And so that's played with in quite a few other stories. But Wells's idea is that no matter what time, which he consistently represents with clocks, will catch up. And he constantly plays with this idea of the larger game. Are you able to see the bigger picture? There's a few other really interesting themes that I think come up with this, right? I mean, there's this idea in there that one of the characters says, don't all foreign strangers have foreign accents? It was like that we'd be able to tell the foreigner, the different, the removed, the threat, because they would sound or look different, when in reality, they rarely do. But we like to misplace our fear there, right? I mean, this is the basis of racism and xenophobia, the idea that the different is what's scary, rather than we need to look within. The shadow is internal. This is an internal part of the human experience and tends to exist within our own. Right? If you look at some of the scariest individuals in our country, in America, for anyone who might be interested, history, they were so good at existing in broad daylight. Bundy didn't hunt at night. Dahmer once got pulled over by the cops walking with someone he had drilled a hole into the head of. These monsters are very capable of walking and playing the part. Monsters very rarely want to separate, especially in a modern society that places so many restrictions on their existence. They have to come as snakes. Yet again, to return to the Lucifer allegory, they have to slither. And they have to play feeble. It has to be, oh, and I'm just trying to protect what I love. And seduce those that are around. It has to be patient, willing to wait for the time to strike. predators are stealthy creatures, and this is what Wells is showing us. And the reason this all ties back into the theory, into circle theory and the narrative, is the fact that for there to be heroes in a societal myth, they have to have villains. And I argue that these villains tend to come in this regard, or at least the ones we currently need to be most aware of. So I think this is an idea worth exploring further, at least for the sake of my journal. You know, I think my favorite character in the entire film is the shopkeeper that's always playing checkers. And he always makes comments about keep your head in the game. You got to be aware at all times. He almost works as a narrator in this regard, when only one character really is, and that's our hunter, our hero in this tale. So I suppose I end with this. The question that I ask, that I think is important to answer, is if you were to be seduced by evil, by chaos, do you really think you know? Or is what makes that evil effective the fact that it can bring you up in it and seduce you? I think that's what makes a great hero one that's able to sympathize, which that's a whole nother discussion. But to be a hero, that individual needs to be able to look at the shadow within themselves, face it, understand it, and beat it. Right? This is why the villain understands that the best way to beat the hero isn't in combat, but in conversion. The hero always tries to redeem the villain. And I think oftentimes we've created a culture climate that's very difficult for that. We want to burn witches. And I'm not sure that that is the best solution. Rather, I would argue and disagree with Wells here that when all possible, the best thing we can do is make order out of chaos and redeem those that have been seduced by darkness, for whatever that's worth.